I'm sure that this review is going to make some, if not all, of my beloved audience end up hating me. So sit back and enjoy this unmanageable experience of me reviewing the Godfather Trilogy in 4K. Now, to preface, apparently the Godfather films are based off of books, which I don't believe many, if any, people realize that in this world. I would say really the most devout Godfather watchers probably are the only ones that know about the books, and me. But from what I've gathered after learning that, apparently the Godfather films intentionally deviate from the books. That's just what I've read. I don't really know. But the Godfather Trilogy is Francis Ford Coppola's literal Godfather masterpiece. So everybody says. All hail the Godfather. All hail Francis Ford Coppola. If I'm even saying that fucking name right. And I'm Italian and I probably am getting it wrong. Well, honestly, in all brutal honesty from me, the Godfather Trilogy, while it is good, I think it is super, super overrated. Now, the best parts of this review, the 4K aspects. The visuals look amazing for all three Godfather films, particularly because of how old they are, set aside the third one, which I think was made in the 90s. And obviously, because of that, the third one is going to look the best. But with that being said, the first two Godfathers still look magnificent. They've aged very well. Audio is the same way. I would say the video and visuals of the Godfather Trilogy are a lot better than the audio, but the audio is still a beast. Now, this is probably the part that is going to have all of the film community hate me. The Godfather Part 3 is my personal favorite of the trilogy. Now bear with me. Please don't get your knives out yet. Bear with me. Okay, so I've only ever watched the versions that you can see in 4K, which means I've only ever seen the Godfather Part 3's re-edited version. So at least give me some credit. I watched the good version. Now, that's not saying that the first two Godfathers are trash, because they absolutely are not. I would say Part 3 is my favorite, and then very, very close, Part 2 would be my second favorite, but like, just barely is that my second favorite. If Part 3, most likely if I had watched Part 3's original version, I most likely would probably hate that one, just like everybody else. But I watched the re-edited version, and I loved it, and Part 2 is just an amazing film because it fully fleshes out characters that were introduced in the first one, while also rediscovering said characters from the first one that are continuing in the second one, and they fully fleshed out past characters' history and just the lineage of the entire Corleone family. Now, yes, that is to say the Godfather Part 1 is my least favorite one, but I would still rank that as an excellent film. Bear with me. So, the reason why my favorites of the Godfather Trilogy are so ass backwards is because the more you continue into the Godfather film series, the more you realize they make more and more sense with each iteration. Godfather Part 3, the re-edited version, is just such a smooth and well-focused film. It's a film that doesn't really go back and forth for anything. It's a film that has a main storyline, and it goes through said main storyline in about 2.5 hours. And there really aren't any minutes or elements in this film that you could say this shit can be taken out. Honestly, it's everything in the Godfather Part 3 is prevalent, at least in the re-edited version. Now, that's not to say that I'm pro-incest, despite also my love of Game of Thrones and the Targaryen lineage, Fire and Blood book, but I did like and appreciate that from Hollywood, somebody such as Francis Ford Coppola did make a story about an incestuous relationship. And the reason why is because that's such a taboo idea in most of this country and maybe most of this world, where, say like Game of Thrones, brothers and sisters hooking up. While I don't agree with it whatsoever, it's such a taboo subject that nobody ever really even talks about incest. And honestly, they always correlate it with rape. And I don't know the statistics, but I can tell you for a fact that if it's an adult having incestuous relations, most likely that's not rape. Most likely that's just them realizing they're the closest in each other's lives. And again, I don't agree with it. I need to preface that every time I bring this up. But The Godfather Part 3 veers heavily into incestuous storylines, and that's not even the bulk of why I prefer The Godfather Part 3 above the other two. It's mainly just how focused and well told and how smooth that film flows through 2.5 hours compared to the other two. Now, The Godfather Part 1, honestly, in my honest, brutal opinion, I think it's very well written. I think it's very well directed. I think it's extremely well acted. And we're talking the Al Pacino days before he was just acting through screaming at everybody, or even just screaming at the air. But The Godfather Part 1 is an excellent film. Just like the Witcher book series and its English translation, The Godfather Part 1, by the end of it, it honestly feels like there were many, many scenes intentionally ripped apart and ripped out of the film to intentionally make you feel confused, to make it seem like it's, this ultra complex film. But really, it's just another mafia film about a certain family, and the father is the boss of them. And for some reason, Francis Ford Coppola and other filmmakers intertwined in the making of The Godfather, they felt the need to kind of dissect their own film to make it seem more complex than it really is. It's really not a complex film. The only reason it feels that way, or even confusing, is like I said, they very clearly pulled scenes out of that film, and because of that, it feels incoherent. Yes, it still feels complete to a sense, but it definitely feels very incoherent by the end of the film. When I watch a film, I sit down or I lay down. I honestly usually never eat because I'm trying to focus fully on what I'm watching, how it's told, what I'm hearing, everything. And so I went through this 3-hour behemoth completely enthused in the entire experience. I was immersed completely. There were no muddling seconds where I had to pause or I had to go to the bathroom, nothing. I sat through this motherfucker for 3 straight hours. And what I gathered from that was, this would have been such a great film if Francis Coppola and company didn't fucking put their hands on it by the end of this film. Now, The Godfather Part 1 is really the only one in this trilogy that has that unfortunate side to it. The Godfather Part 2 tells a full, complete story. And it is a wonderful, very drawn out, extremely well written, extremely well told, overly long, very fucking long film. The Godfather Part 2, if I remember correctly, is about 3.5 hours. And it's a storyline of the present for continuation after The Godfather Part 1, as well as backstory of the former Godfather from Part 1 and his growing up in the world. And with that being said, The Godfather Part 2 is basically just 2 main storylines where they don't really intertwine, but it's more so a continuing storyline and a backstory that kind of fills in blanks that you weren't really thinking of that basically led up to the Godfather's start. Now, The Godfather Part 2, I do love that film. I don't really have many nitpicks about that film particularly, although, like I said, it's an extremely fucking long movie. It's not Zack Snyder's Justice League long, but it's still close to that runtime. And while every second, every minute of that film is justified for that reason, I still feel like any movie longer than 3 hours, it's kind of just sniffing its own farts at that point. Take, for example, Killers of the Flower Moon. Love the film. A lot of things I didn't like about it, and there was no fucking reason why it needed to be 3.5 hours long. Especially considering we knew who the killers were basically 10, 15 minutes into that fucking movie. It was just more so taking us through how they eventually get caught and what happens to them. But The Godfather Part 2, fortunately, leaves all of their twists and everything to the viewer's immersion. And that's what I strongly loved about The Godfather Part 2, how immersive it was. Now, I already talked about The Godfather Part 3 and how that is my favorite of the trilogy. And even after discussing all three of these films with you guys, I still firmly believe The Godfather Part 3 is my favorite, just because the main storyline and everything written about it in the direction and the fact that it's shorter than the other two really, really makes this film feel so much more focused. And the fact that there are subplots in it, like I said, the family relations, I won't get into it, as well as Al Pacino's character still just kind of carrying on, and the aspects of what happens when you're in a mafia family as far as who abandons you, who you have to take out, who ends up going to jail, who ends up dying from other people because they don't like you. And The Godfather Part 3, for me, honestly, it just felt way more cohesive than the other two. But that's not to say that it's a knock on the other two. I still think all three of these films are great, magnificent even, all three. But overall, for me, The Godfather Trilogy in 4K, for me, honestly, it got better and better with every iteration of the movies that continued through this franchise. So overall, for me, The Godfather Trilogy, very strong, very subtle, 8 out of 10, with nothing pulled out of that score. 8 out of 10, The Godfather Trilogy 4K. Thank you.